Good morning. So Jude made that for us. Thanks, Jude. Um, as I think was mentioned a couple times, we've been in a couple of locations, and one of those was online, which means I know what it's like to have to pray to a camera. So if you are a part of this video, I feel your pain. It's super awkward to do it and then to watch it, so that you came to service is really brave, so I applaud you. I know how that can feel. That's a tough thing. But thank you so much for being a part of that, for your prayers, and happy birthday, right? It's just exciting. If I lose it, I'm going to blame Deb for your prayer. I didn't anticipate this, but it's a big deal. So thank you so much for all of you. Let me pray. Lord, I pray that you would speak to this message. As always, I pray you speak to me and through me. We all need to hear from you and be reminded of who you are and what you're doing and what you've done. And so we just give you this time in your name. Amen. Well, it is a birthday, as you have heard, and I think these things are sort of interesting. I'm a milestone person. If I'm reading a book, I want to know if I'm halfway. As you know, I run a little bit, and I recently did a 31-mile race, which was a bad idea. I knew it was a bad idea when I signed up for it. In fact, I said, this is a bad idea. I'm going to go ahead and do this. So that was last Saturday. I did that in Iowa, and then got in the car for a 2-hour drive home with both legs cramping up, reinforcing that it was a bad idea. But halfway through a 31-mile run, I'm more than halfway, which means I have less to do than what I've done, so it should get easier, right? That's not how that works, but that is how my brain works. So milestones are important to me. I think about it a lot. But I think they're kind of equally arbitrary and meaningful. We can place great emphasis on certain birthdays, say turning 30. It's as if turning 30 is somehow much more impressive than turning 29, right? Like, well done, you made it. Like, last year, it was like, meh. This year, 30, wow, well done. By that logic, we should get super excited about 31, but we don't, right? So, like, sometimes they're kind of meaningful and arbitrary all at the same time. I think when we turn 20, it's like, it's the starting of a decade. 20s are kind of like the freshman decade of our adulthood. 30s are kind of like the sophomore, like, this is kind of doing this thing, right? We're kind of in it. So like, they can be meaningful and arbitrary all at the same time. And so as we've talked about our birthday, Michelle the other day asked, like, well, do you celebrate birthdays every year, like forever? At some point, does it stop? Like the church we came from, we had no idea what year it was in until it was around the 50th. Like, oh, okay, it's been around 50 years, so that's a great thing. So at some point, do we stop doing this? We don't know. The fact is, if you've ever been a part of Bluffs, we're always looking for excuse for a party, so it's a good chance we're going to keep finding ways to do this, no matter how much sense it makes. It is the 5th birthday, and it is hard to believe. It feels like a miracle because it has always felt like a miracle. It's a miracle in which we partner with God. We've seen his faithfulness and provision, and we've been changed by the journey, and we're grateful for it. Our lives have been enriched by memories, and those are memories we share with you. We talk about memories. We talk about stories a lot here. It's what our logo is about. That Karen and this Karen on the stage is what that's about. It's about stories. It's some of what our tagline is about. Deb prayed this, honest, sacred, together. If we're honest, we need to help each other remember what God has done, because what he has done comes out of who he is. We do this together. We remember what he's done and who he is, and we remind each other of that. As we grow up, we realize that much of life is fairly mundane. That's not to say it's boring or purposeless. It's just repetitive. It's designed to be that way. God is a God of order, so things should be repetitive. God loves order, and most of our days are full of day-to-day experiences. And we can get lost in that a little bit, right? But we need to remember that lots of wonderful things are repetitive, like a beautiful sunrise or sunset. I grew up a block away from Lake Michigan. We didn't have a lot, but we had sunsets. And so when you don't have a lot and you have sunsets, you go watch a lot of sunsets, right? It's free entertainment. And it's rare when you watch a sunset and you go like, meh, it could be better, right? I mean, you're watching the sun dip into Lake Michigan, and I was probably way too old before I got over the mystery of why isn't the sun being put out by Lake Michigan. Like, it was very confusing to me. Like, I can see it going into the water. It must be extinguished. But last year, read some books about it and figured it out. No one watches one of those and says, like, honestly, can't we do better? But it's mundane. It's repetitive. It's over and over again. Some moments are special. They're holy. And things can be made holy in a couple of different ways. They're holy because God deems them so, and they're holy because we make them so. We make them special. We hold some things to be special, and we reserve them for special occasions. Some of you grew up where there was special china that only came out at holidays or when, certain people came over, right? Michelle's mom had a collection of those until Michelle wanted to play with them. And then, now they're gone. We have secrets we trust to very few people, memories that punctuate and give meaning and purpose to the day to day. These things are holy. They're sacred. We see this in Scripture, the divine and the human interacting, partnering to make meaning and give purpose and direction to the mundane. In the Old Testament, these were often marked by an altar or a heap, they're sometimes called. These were essentially piles of rocks intentionally stacked to mark the spot of something significant. Something happened here. Think of it as a less portable version of the various unity symbols you see at weddings. It used to be that you took 2 candles and you lit a new candle, and that was the symbol of your new family, right? And then that unity candle went somewhere for the first few years, maybe on a mantle if you had one, on a bookshelf where people could see it. Eventually it gets maybe put to the bedroom, and eventually it gets stored away, but it's stored well, right? It's preserved. We keep this thing. And then people got clever, and they had different colored sand, and like, oh, that's pretty, and so we had sand. And now there's all different kinds of things. We did, a few years ago, we did a lot of weddings, and we started to see different versions of these things, and one was the, tying ropes together and making weaving two strands of rope with a strand representing God. And so it was beautiful, and it's just rope on some wood, but it symbolizes so much. And so that piece of wood with those pieces of rope are loaded with meaning and memory for a couple. These heaps in Scripture are like that. They're a very earthly representation of something special, something holy. So we're going to talk about a few of these. In Genesis 31:44 through 48, it says this, "Come now, let us make a covenant, you and I, and let it be a witness between you and me." So Jacob took a stone and set it up as a pillar. And Jacob said to his kinsmen, "Gather stones," and they took stones and made a heap, and they ate there by the heap. Laban called it Jegar-Sahadutha, which is Aramaic for heap of witness. But Jacob called it Gilead, which is Hebrew for heap of witness. Laban said, "This heap is a witness between you and me today." So I'm not going to tell the whole story. There's a lot to tell in the story of Jacob and Laban. But Laban was Jacob's father-in-law. And Jacob had gone home to his ancestral home to find a wife. And he found one, ended up with 2, and then 2 concubines. And it's all weird and kind of icky, and try to get lost in that. And Jacob was blessed, and he blessed his father-in-law, but it became time for Jacob to go. And so he's trying to leave, and he eventually takes off and with his family, his staff, and all of his produce, all that he had built up. And he takes off. And when we read the Genesis especially, sometimes we see some shady ethics. We're like, what is that about? How come they're doing that? These are supposed to be patriarchs, right? Examples. Most of them aren't. A lot of Genesis is full of things that are just, they happen, but maybe they ought not to. And it reflects an ancient Babylonian ethic, a pre-Jewish ethic, right? And so Laban chases down Jacob, and he has every right and all the power to take all of Jacob's possessions, even his daughter's back. So this is an untenable situation. What are we going to do? But they come to an agreement, and they built a heap of witness. Somehow, God helped them resolve it peacefully. Seemed impossible. It was incredibly unlikely. But they resolved it peacefully. Some of you have heard a little bit, but know very little about the fact that Bluffs was challenged with a very difficult situation once. We've had others, but this one was a big deal. And it was before we even launched. It's a painful memory for the staff, for Michelle and Esther and I. But we can also look back and see God's hand in directing and resolving it peacefully and ultimately for the best. We weren't alone in that situation. We had help. It was relatively public, but we tried to keep it as private as possible. But some other people knew about it, and they were in the loop. They saw what God had done and saw that God was faithful. And so while it's painful, we're grateful for it because we know God was there then, and so he may be there again. Laban and Jacob's people would have been in the loop as well. To some degree, some people were aware of our situation, and so that memory is a heap of witness, and it serves as an example of God's guidance and presence in difficult situations. And so I know this. I mentioned I'm going to do this, and I got some pushback from the team. I'm going to temporarily dismantle our cairn, but we'll reestablish it. So we have a heap of witness, a cairn, a milestone, an example of God's faithfulness. Moving on, Genesis 35:1. God said to Jacob, "Arise, go up to Bethel and dwell there. Make an altar there to the God who appeared to you when you fled from your brother Esau." Then moving on in the story, God appeared to Jacob again when he came from Padan Aram and blessed him. And Jacob set up a pillar in the place where he had spoken with him, a pillar of stone. He poured out a drink offering on it and poured oil on it. So Jacob called the name of the place where God had spoken with him, Bethel. Beth, or Bet, means house. El means God, so Bethel is house of God. So God has called Jacob back to this place, and he makes a pillar of stone, an altar, a heap of witness. Well, what had happened there? Well, this is where God met Jacob in a dream, and the dream is strange, and we can talk about it and try to figure it out. God speaks to us in dreams and visions and ways that we're going to understand. It says this in Genesis 28. Jacob left Beersheba and went toward Haran, a certain place, and stayed there that night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones of the place, he put it under his head and lay down in that place to sleep. Now, I have done some long backpacking trips and some long single-day hikes. One time I was on a hike with Michael Weitz, you might know that name, right? And we were doing 43 miles in one day, and at one point we didn't have enough food. We had enough food for half that amount of miles, so it was bad. And at one point, Michael was starting to just kind of wander on the trail, which is bad, right? So we thought, we're just going to lay down. So we lay down and took a 45-minute nap just on the trail in the woods, just like a couple of vagabonds in the woods. I've never once thought, you know what would make this better? A stone under my head. That would really just make it give it that homey, cozy feel we all want. So I don't know what kind of shape he was in, but that's what he did. He laid down with the stone for a pillow. So early in the morning, Jacob took the stone that he had put under his head and set it up for a pillar and poured oil on the top of it. And he called the name of that place Bethel. Then Jacob made a vow, saying, "If God will be with me and will keep me in this way that I go, I will give me bread to eat and clothing to wear, so that I come to my father's house in peace. Then the Lord shall be my God. And this stone which I have set up for a pillar shall be God's house. And all that you give me, I will give a tenth to you." So Jacob has this dream, and it's a dream of Jacob's ladder. Sometimes it's translated stairway. It's likely a reference to a ziggurat, which was an ancient Babylonian temple, which is probably what the Tower of Babel was about. It wasn't like a tower I always picture like the Tower of Pisa. For some reason, the Tower of Babel is leaning. I don't know why, but in my head it's leaning. It's not like that. Likely, they couldn't have built a tower like that. They didn't have the technology. They built it in big steps. So it's likely he envisions something like this. The ziggurat was an attempt at man reaching up to God and maybe becoming a little bit equal with God, because for a Babylonian pagan, gods were more like superhuman. They weren't like what we think of God, eternal and everywhere and all-powerful and all that. Jacob envisions a ladder, but instead of man going up to heaven, it's heaven coming down to man. I'm going to come down and I'm going to help you. I'm going to show you the way. It's a radically different vision of our relationship with God, with the divine. So this is the vision he had, the dream he had in chapter 28. And in 35, he goes back there. But Jacob's experience was private. It was personal. Right? We only know about it because he told someone who told someone else, and eventually someone thought we should write this down. Which means, while we take it to be true, it's totally unverifiable. Right? We can't prove that this happened. There's no way to know the way we Americans like to know things. There's no way to know that it happened. The thing is, there are various ways of knowing. Some are methodical. They're scientific. And even that, right? Even that, science, those who are involved with research know that they're always exposing a little bit more and learning a little bit and then learning all the things they don't know and need to know. But there's a methodical, scientific way to know things. But some other ways of knowing things are more nuanced. They're artful. I know that Bob Dylan is the best musician ever. Right? And you may know otherwise, right? I might love a song that you don't love. You might love someone that I don't. Maybe I like them a little bit, maybe I don't like them at all, but you love them dearly. And you know that they're lovable and worthy of your love. We can know things very differently. Some of these are very personal experiences of knowing. And even though they're personal, they affect others. Jacob's experience with God at Bethel created a place around which his family and then the nation of Israel could orient. This unverifiable experience with God became significantly symbolic to the nation of Israel. God has come down to guide us. God met Jacob there. You can picture the ancient Israelites and you can picture us saying, God met Jacob. Do you remember that? There's an altar there. There's a heap there. And it's true. Michelle and I years ago felt God was calling us to do something new and to do something together. It was the beginning of a dream that eventually became Bluffs Community Church. Before that, I felt God had been calling me away from the college work, which had been my life. I thought I was going to work at colleges for my whole career, and I was excited about that. I was fine with that. That was exciting to me. And then we felt something was changing. I had toyed with the idea of pastoral ministry for a long time, but then it became very clear, like God was leading me into this new ministry, this new way of serving him. And as I was going through my journey, Michelle was also becoming much more comfortable with her own pastoral giftings. And some of you have heard this story. She was on staff at our church, but was determined to not be a lead pastor or be married to a lead pastor. In fact, after decades of being a pastor's kid, she's like, that's the last thing I want to do. Like, been there, seen that, right? And so I was very uncomfortable with the idea, but gradually began to make sense. We began to feel like, yes, we want to do something and do it together. The thing is, we can't prove to you that those things that we were sensing are true. But the dream continues to be real and meaningful. And when we feel less sure, we can orient ourselves around that. We can remember, yes. So when we go through tough times at Bluffs, and there have been tough times at Bluffs. Michelle mentioned COVID, of course, was tough for everyone. We're at this conference, and they're saying, yeah, churches are going to have to shut down. We're like, we can't shut down. We just started. Like, what are you talking about? Like, can we get a pass on that? Can we just, like, everyone else can shut down, but not us? Perhaps you have a similar memory. God spoke and you felt something. You can't quite put your finger on it, but that it's there. Back at Bethel, wherever Bethel is. Back at Bethel is a memory, a heap of witness that reminds you of something real and undeniable and unforgettable. Jacob went back to Bethel to remember. At Bethel, Jacob's fear lost some of its power as he remembered that the God of heaven and earth had come to him. But this time, he brought others with him. Sometimes we need to include others in the story. We share the dream. We show them the rock you used as a pillow. Right here, God spoke to me. It takes a lot of courage to share that dream sometimes. Sometimes the dreams don't make sense. Sometimes they're weird. We did that, and it helped. As we shared our sketchy, unvarnished vision of Bluffs to people who knew and loved us, people who were sad to see us leave, they said things like, well, that makes total sense. Like, oh, so we can relax? Yeah, you're fine. Totally what God wants you to do. Oh, it's not what we expected. So we shared the story, like Jacob shared his story with his people, his tribe. We began to share it with people who loved us and who could help us do this. Sometimes God speaks through his people too, and sometimes their sacred holy moments become our sacred holy moment. So Jacob's moment became a moment for Israel. And maybe you have a moment, maybe you have a story, and that story can become a story for me as well. And if you are already taken over under on how many times I'm going to trip on these rocks, I'm with you. Joshua 4. When all the nation had finished passing over the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, "Take 12 men from the people, from each tribe a man, and command them, saying, 'Take 12 stones from here out of the midst of the Jordan, from the very place where the priest's feet stood firmly, and bring them over with you and lay them down in the place where you lodge tonight.'" So if you're unfamiliar, Joshua took over the leadership of Israel from Moses. Moses was told, "You will not lead my people into the promised land." Joshua has this honor. It was Joshua who led them across the Jordan into the land that God had promised Abraham. This whole story begins with Abraham. Moving on, and those 12 stones which they took out of the Jordan, Joshua set up at Gilgal, and he said to the people of Israel, "When your children ask their fathers in times to come, 'What do these stones mean?' then you shall let your children know, Israel passed over this Jordan on dry ground. For the Lord your God dried up the waters of the Jordan for you until you passed over, as the Lord your God did to the Red Sea, which he dried up for us until we passed over, so that all the peoples of the earth may know that the hand of the Lord is mighty, that you may fear the Lord your God forever." So these stones were a reminder of God reaching down to earth and calling people from one place to another. Now, none of these people are people we would likely choose. Like if you were just to kind of lay out the resumes, you're like, no, pass, pass, pass. It's not about us reaching up to heaven and convincing him. It's about God coming down to us. So he calls these people. The stones were a reminder of deliverance, which means they're a reminder of slavery, of like the worst, right? These stones also represented each of the 12 tribes of Israel, which means they also represent 12 sons of Israel, 10 of whom sold one brother into slavery. And they did other gross things too. The resumes are not great. So the stones reminded them, and they reminded us, that it is God who reaches down and calls the unlikeliest and rescues the undeserving. I have memories of rescue, and so do many of you. We've seen that here. It's been a blessing to be a part of, to watch that happen. Joshua made it a point to carry reminders of the good and the bad so that his people wouldn't forget who God is and what he did, who God is and what he does. So we can trust some of the history, though it is ancient and hard to verify, so we must also know it artfully. And when in doubt, we follow the trail, right? See what I'm doing here? In this rock, we have several other rocks represented. For Joshua, the book of Deuteronomy is written, it's the one right before Joshua. It's basically a retelling of the previous 4 books. But in the context of moving into the promised land that the Israelites did not earn or deserve. So lest you get cocky, remember all this stuff. Of course, the Israelites forgot that it was God who had blessed them. And so the story, God and people, continues to be convoluted and difficult. Joshua is trying to help his people that he's now leading. Remember, it is God who rescued us and God who's providing for us, which means we were in desperate need of rescue and desperate need of provision. We often want to hide these things. I don't want to tell you. It's okay to have some stories that are private, they're painful, only a few people are in the loop. That's okay. But we need to remember that it is God who is rescuing us, and so that is a great story. That's a heap of witness. That is a place to make an altar. It's not to ignore. God, on the altar of my addiction, of my bad choices, on whatever it might be, on that I give you praise, and I remember that you rescued me. Right? And God makes ugly things into beautiful things. As you've heard, we had various locations, and we weren't always sure of where we were going to meet as a church. One birthday, I can't remember if it was our second or third, Esther. It was Wednesday night, so like this past Wednesday, and we were going to have a worship service. And so the building we were using, I stopped by around noon, and it was 50 degrees. And I'm like, we can't do this. So I called up the landlord, like, hey, the heat's not working. Oh, it's just there. The heat's fine. But it's not. It's 50. Is it going to be warm enough by tonight? I don't know. Cool. So we canceled the worship service, and then we were looking for a building. Like where we're gonna have, we know we can't. We were heading to our birthday. The birthday service is the one that you really want to work. I showed up this morning, and Nate's like, "Yeah, ProPresenter's not working," and Esther's trying to figure it out. We're like, there's like logos popping up. It was just all freaking out. Like you can do this all day next week, not today, right? Right. So it's a birthday service, and we really wanted to go well, and it just like, are we going to be able to meet? And so this was Wednesday. Thursday, we're kind of negotiating. Friday, Michelle and I leave for a short conference in the Green Bay area. We're calling around trying to find a location. Are we going to be able to have service? We're able to go back home to the pump house. We've been there. It's been tough at times. Where are we going to meet? What's going to happen? We were grateful to move here and not have to, people always like, isn't it so great to not have to set up every week? And yeah, that's great. I think the biggest blessing is that we can do things on a Wednesday and no one can tell us no, and the heat's going to work, right? And so we have a little bit more freedom to meet and make memories here. Though a few weeks ago, I was talking with Amber Groves, and she says, I kind of miss the setup team, which is like the most Amber Grovesy thing to say, because she's like, let's do the work. Let's get it done, right? There's work to do. Let's do it. So God bless her and people like that. But I was like, yeah, totally. Totally miss that. I miss that for you. Somewhere back in here, Sam, there's a rest in peace setup team, right? Somewhere in the middle when we wrote on the floor. So those are good times. We don't want to go back, right? The other day, Michelle and I were downtown by the pump house, and I was thinking about how grateful I am for the pump house. I mean, it was awesome. It was a beautiful building. They let us in. When we launched, the city got upset about it, and the director of the pump house was like, "These are great people. Don't worry about it." I'm like, "Okay, Tony, right? Like, you don't know us at all, but thank you so much." And so she advocated for us, and so those are great stories, and we look back with fondness. We don't want to go back, but we're grateful for those. They're important memories. Through each one, God proved faithful to Bluffs and has reaffirmed the original vision. We don't know what's next, but we trust the path methodically and scientifically and historically and artfully, right? We remember what he did and who he is because what he did came out of who he is. It's his character of goodness and love and justice. And so we follow the trail, the cairns. We join him in the journey. From stone to stone, the path can become unclear for sure. Sometimes we get to the end of the path, and we're like, I don't see another stone. I don't know what to do. And we've got a couple options here. One is to look back, and maybe to go back to Bethel or to when God called Abraham, and then look forward again. And now we have some ideas. The trail seems to be going this way. I'm going to continue. And the other is to trust that. Some of us are who's really, just be honest, it's okay, really dependent on their GPS on their phone to get places, or their car, right? Yeah. Who's dependent on that in town? Couple of you, yeah? Couple of you. He's not here. There's someone who's lived in this area his whole life and still uses it to get to work. I'm like, bruh, it's not that hard. And I start talking, you can see his eyes just kind of glass over. It's like, I don't know what you're talking about. It's like I've switched dialects. But let's say I was using my GPS to get to Rochester. Eventually, it would say something like, go straight for 51 miles and then turn right. And after 20 miles, we call our GPS voice LaFonda. It's after Kip's girlfriend from Napoleon Dynamite. I don't know why. We probably watched it around the same time we first got it, GPS, and like, okay, LaFonda it is. So sometimes you're like, take it easy, right? LaFonda. But if I'm 20 miles into that 51-mile trip before the next turn, I can get a little panicky. Am I still going the right way? And I know you can all pull up the screen, but just work with me. And so we can just make a turn. Well, I just got to do something, right? Make a decision. If this doesn't feel right, I'm nervous. Or I can just follow the direction God gave me until he gives me some new directions, right? And I look back, and this seems to be on the path. And like a good celestial GPS unit, God says, okay, sometimes he redirects, but just do this. Do the thing you've been given to do. That's what I have for you. And we're doing this in the path of faithfulness, right? God's coming down to earth. Some of these are my stories. Some of these are your stories. But they're all important stories. They're all heaps of witness that make sense of all this. So we don't know exactly what the future holds for Bluffs Community Church. Sometimes you get to these services, or we'll have Michelle mentioned, having members, we'll have a business meeting, we'll talk about all that stuff, and people want, like, what's the clear idea? What's going to happen next? Of course, we have dreams and visions and hopes for Bluffs. Of course we do. All of us who are invested in this thing do, but we don't know. We didn't know COVID was going to come. We didn't know we were going to have to move and go online, which meant we had to buy a camera. We didn't know all that stuff. So we just keep doing what God has called us to do. And sometimes we look back, not to go back, but to remember. Remember the miracles that have gotten us here to this point. As we look back, we can look forward with confidence. Bree and Gavin, if you want to come up. We're going to have communion together. Communion is about remembering and committing. It's a recommitting. So what I would like you to do, we have some of these prepackaged ones that are just like what the early church used. Those have a gluten-free cracker in them if you need that. But I'd like you to kind of make a circle and kind of go this way. If you want to just come up and grab the elements and then return to your seat. And while we're doing this, Nate, you can start the music. Just reflect on, maybe you've seen some of these things in the story of Bluffs. Maybe you have some rocks that you might say, I think my rock might be helpful here. Or I have a story, a heap of witness I'd like to share with some people that might be helpful for them. Sometimes I'm in a low place, and I hear what God's doing in your life. I'm encouraged. My faith is restored. And so your rock becomes a rock for me, right? And how neat is that? Right? We get to be the church. So as we're grabbing our elements, please just go ahead and start. We can just kind of start over here, work our way. Let's think about and remember those things. Go ahead. We sang about these things. Most services, it's very rare that we ask Esther to play a specific song for a service. Occasionally I might say, hey, can we close with that one? That's a great closer. Often I'm surprised at how well the songs fit, even though we haven't discussed it. Planning this service, Michelle and I just inundated her with like, we want to play this song, this song, this song. She's like, whoa, 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 I get to pick at least one song. Okay, you get one. But we wanted to sing songs that are full of reminders, right? You are the same God. You're the God of promises. So as we collect our elements, prepare for communion, let's continue in that vein. We're worshiping and we're going to commune with the God of promises, the same God that called Abraham and Jacob and helped Joshua cross the Jordan. He wants to help us today. Thank you. Communion is a time to reflect on and renew our faith in the sacrifice of Jesus for our salvation. It's a time to acknowledge who he is and what he has done for us. It's a time to remember. Paul wrote in 1 Corinthians 11, the Lord Jesus on the night when he was betrayed took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and said, this is my body, which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me. And so the death of Jesus, Good Friday and Easter, the historical and historic events become part of our past. And the art, the faith, the unlikeliness of it all becomes part of our future. You see, our path leads somewhat to Jesus. We remember and we believe, and so we can move. So let's pause and remember Jesus' broken body. You may take the bread now. In the same way, he also took the cup after supper, saying, this cup is the new covenant in my blood. Do this as often as you drink it in remembrance of me. For as often as you eat this bread and drink this cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes. So we remember not just the blood, that his blood was shed, but why his blood was shed. Because I needed it to be shed. And so did you. The Last Supper, the First Communion, the Passover is about remembering our slavery and remembering our deliverer. So let's pause and reflect on Jesus' shed blood. You may drink the juice now. I always forget this, so after service, if you want to put your cups here from the tray, that'd be great. Let's pray. Lord, thank you for writing a new story, a story we couldn't have written, a story full of characters we wouldn't have included. And while we don't see how it's all going to wrap up, we know it points to you. And so we thank you for being included in the journey. And thank you that there are so many heaps of witnesses, so many examples of your faithfulness, your correction, your provision, your help, your patience, your love. We talked about a few this morning, but in this room there are many, many more stories. We thank you for Bluffs and what you've done in Bluffs, and we pray that you continue to use Bluffs to be a blessing to the cross. But mostly right now, we just thank you for you, for coming for us, for dying for us, and including us in your story. We love you, Lord. Worship team, if you want to come up. We're going to sing one more song. Can we stand together? We're going to sing one more song, and watch out for the rocks on stage. And as I often like to do, I just encourage you. Maybe you don't sing at all. Maybe at this moment you just thank God for what he's done in your life or someone else's life. That's okay. We're offering praise. This is a sacrifice of praise, and it can look like a lot of things. It can certainly, like the music that Esther and the team have prepared, it can look like other things as well. So let's just thank God for what he's done and trust that he's going to continue to do things like that and even more.